Hi, I want to welcome you back on behalf of SEEP. As we regather, I hope we keep the people of Ukraine in our prayers. And I hope that you've had a great first day and learned lots of great things in your sessions and had lots of lovely conversations. And please join us after this keynote out in the exhibit hall for an opening reception. And so now I want to welcome Bishop Greg Rickles, the Bishop of Olympia, to introduce our keynote.
Thank you, Peggy. Hello, SEEP. I'm here today, I believe, and quite proudly so, in my capacity as chair of the American Friends for the Episcopal Diocese of Jerusalem, also known as AFEDJ. The American Friends is the major U.S. funding facilitator for the many amazing ministries overseen by Archbishop Nahum and the small but mighty and faithful band of Episcopalians in the land of the Holy One. American Friends has a booth in the exhibit area, and so I hope you'll come by that and perhaps meet Heidi Schott, our communications director, maybe the Archbishop himself, maybe me. Heidi's the one with the goods, however, so go see her. This afternoon, it's my task and my honor to introduce two people, one who will guide this discussion and the other our most honored guest with us from Jerusalem. Both of them I consider friends and have for quite some time. First, to guide the conversation this evening, the very Reverend Dominic Barrington, who is Dean of St. James Cathedral in Chicago and is also Principal and Manager of Lightline North America, helping you to lead pilgrimages to the Holy Land and many other fabulous places around this great planet of ours. Join me this night in welcoming Dominic to be on the stage this afternoon and to guide our conversation. Dominic. And now the Most Reverend Hosam Nahum was consecrated as Bishop Coadjutor of the Episcopal Diocese of Jerusalem in June 2020 in the midst of this pandemic. And he was installed as diocesan and the 15th Anglican bishop in Jerusalem on May 13th, 2021. The Archbishop was born in Haifa in 1974, and he grew up in Shepha Amra in Galilee. Married to his wife Rafa, they have a son and two daughters, Wadia, Laris, and Krista. As diocesan bishop, Archbishop Hosam is the chief pastor of the 28 parishes spread through the 5 political regions of Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. As bishop, he is also chairman of the board of each of more than 30 institutions of education and healthcare spread throughout the 5 countries of the diocese, including Gaza. These institutional ministries provide the best possible services while reaching out to assist those who cannot afford to pay for the services, and by so doing, strengthening the Christian presence in this region. In a multicultural, multi-faith, multi-ethnic diocese spread across 5 countries, Archbishop Nahum is a strong advocate for peace and reconciliation. A significant member of many ecumenical and interfaith organizations, he works with the Archbishop of Canterbury on Anglican and interfaith issues. He's one of the 13 recognized heads of churches in Israel. He faithfully encourages leaders of these churches to make every effort to strengthen the Christian presence as a moderate and mediating body in a region torn by anxiety and unrest. He has made a huge impact in his short time in this office, and it's a joy to work with him as we strive to help the Anglican presence in the land of the Holy One. So SEEP, please help me welcome my good friend, an amazing Christian, and a most dedicated servant of God and God's children, Archbishop Hosam Nahum.
Thank you for your kind words, Bishop Rickle. It's a slightly strange coincidence, perhaps, that the 2 plenary sessions, morning and afternoon, on this first day of the conference, both find expat Brits as the person introducing the conversation. It's not a takeover, I promise. I was intrigued in the morning session when we heard about the search for spirituality that the speaker shared with us and talked about new paradigms of Christianity and faith and life. I went to the Holy Land for the first time 26 years ago, partly because the original Christian paradigm, of course, is incarnation. And incarnation is, by its very nature, specific both in history and geography. And I think, like many people in the room, I went on a pilgrimage, and it was life-changing. The first pilgrimage that I went on wasn't a pilgrimage where, I think, to my knowledge, I met a single ethnic Christian in the Holy Land. It took me a while and a journey to wake up to, shall we say, the full spectrum of the realities of the situation in Israel and Palestine. And a few years later, I went back on a pilgrimage working with the Christian communities in Israel and Palestine, and I discovered the local Christians, and deep friendships which have sustained me over the years have sprung up. I'm well aware that many of you have had similar experiences, but also that there will be some people here who've not made the journey to the Holy Land and perhaps know less than others do about the circumstances there. There are Christians all over the world, and there are Episcopalians or Anglicans pretty much all over the world. Archbishop, can I start by asking, in a sense, why you are here, by which I mean you're here because we invited you and it's so wonderful, but why are the Christians of the Holy Land of particular importance to us here in the United States?
Indeed. No, thank you very much, first of all, for this wonderful opportunity to be among you all, among our friends, sisters and brothers in Christ here in the United States, in the Episcopal Church, especially in SEEP and many other partners within the Christian faith and even beyond. A big thank you for Bishop Greg, for the American Friends, and for all our partners in the Episcopal Church and in the United States. I know for me, it's important to say that for me, it's like homecoming. I am somebody who have been educated, especially in the last 10 years or so, or even 12 years in the United States. I'm a graduate of Virginia Theological Seminary, and I have been a frequent visitor to the United States, visiting different dioceses, different churches. And for me, it's, again, as I said, it's like homecoming, to be with my sisters and brothers in Christ in this important event and conference in order to kind of grow relationships, staying connected, and also together trying and working towards understanding God's vision and discern how can we grow together as the body of Christ across the seas and across the continents. So it's wonderful to be here, and it's wonderful to be part of this. Yes, thank you very much for the invitation, but as you know, like for somebody like me who's on high demand in a sense, but as you mentioned, as Bishop Greg mentioned, the diocese extends into 5 countries. And there are so many institutions, there are so many parishes, and the work there, especially in a place where Christianity is not the major religion. And there is so much demand of our clergy and our people, and especially of the bishop, to continue to be with his people. And for me, I have visited most of the congregations and the institutions, and I continue to do that, but also I know that the obligation to connect with the wider Anglican communion and the wider church, and of course the wider human community, it's a big part of what I do in Jerusalem. And that's why it's important to be here today.
Can you tell us just a little bit more, for those that don't know, about the size and nature of the diocese? One of the things which surprised me when I first got to know your diocese, in the West, both in England, where I served for 20 years, and over here, we encounter a bishop, we use words like diocese, and we think principally of lots of churches with people in the pews. We think of the parish side of life. but there is rather more to what you do than simply being the chief shepherd of a network of churches.
Yeah, the Diocese of Jerusalem, like if we will count the Anglicans within, Episcopalians within the diocese, they will not exceed 7,000 or 8,000 altogether in the 5 countries. So it's a very small community. But at the same time, like if people come and visit and see the church and its ministry, they will not believe that we have only 8,000. So the institutions that run between schools and hospitals and rehabilitation centers, guest houses and integration schools and other social and activities and programs, people will definitely think that the Anglican Church, the Episcopal Church, is not only large, but also goes really wide and deep into the community because of the outreach that we do into the community itself. So it's not only pastoral care, but also really showing Christ in action through these institutions that we reach to the, I would say like beyond our comfort zone, so to speak. So our ministry is for all the people who are in the community.
And ministry in the last couple of years, for all of us, has been particularly challenging. You're in a region where there are all sorts of challenges all the time. It would be fascinating for us to learn a little bit more about some of the challenges you faced. Perhaps first, if you could talk to us about how the pandemic has been for you and the people of your region and diocese.
Now, as I mentioned, maybe one of the things that I mentioned earlier in the discussion we had just before coming to this school is that as the bishop, I didn't serve in my episcopacy outside the pandemic, so I don't know how it be to be a bishop outside the pandemic. So please, Bishop Greg, you need to tell me about that. But I realized, and I've been in Jerusalem for 17 years, so I was working together with Archbishop Suhail and also some of his predecessors. But in Jerusalem, being there for a long time to see how the ministry is going. The pandemic itself has really kind of squeezed us even the more. I would say the biggest loss for us as the Diocese of Jerusalem was the absence of pilgrims. So that for us, we know that, maybe we are, as I said, 8,000 Anglicans, but we know that the Episcopal family, the Anglican family, is far larger than this in Jerusalem, because we know that there are about 4.5 million pilgrims who come to Jerusalem every year. That was the statistics. And imagine from 2019 to 2020, we went from 4.5 million to 0 pilgrims during the pandemic. So our congregations dropped drastically in that sense, especially the cathedral. And only last Sunday, the Sunday that just passed, we have had 3 groups in the cathedral for the first time in 2 years. And that was absolutely a transfiguration moment. So in my sermon, I said, now I can say that Jerusalem has life again. So that's one thing that, and I'm really glad that, that restrictions are lifted now, and we have more and more groups coming into the cathedral, close, and to Jerusalem and to the rest of the Holy Land. But also I have to say, like financially also, we were also squeezed in a sense that we have lost because of the properties that we manage. People couldn't pay their lease, and we'll go into details, but basically our budgets fell short because of that, and we had to rely on generous donations with our partners here in the States and other places. But also, it's really important to note, for example, that the Good Friday offering, because people in 2020, they were in quarantine, like no one came to churches. So, and the biggest donor for the Good Friday offering is in the United States. And actually this year we are celebrating 100 years of the Good Friday offering in the United States. There will be...
I'm hoping that everyone is aware that the presiding bishop historically for these many years puts out this appeal to all of you that collections from Good Friday should go to the province, just to make sure we all know what the Archbishop is speaking about.
Indeed, and there will be also some events within General Convention in Baltimore. I hope that I will be there as well in order to promote the work of the American Friends on the one hand, and also the Good Friday offering. So these are only examples, but I would say that the total experience of quarantine and the whole issue in and around COVID has been something that our people dealt with in I would say, to large extent, in a good way, that they managed all what was happening. And the Diocese of Jerusalem did very well through the clergy's ministry with online services, and like many of you have done in your own congregations.
That's encouraging to hear, and I'm sure we take note of the added financial pressures that the pandemic has caused. But the pandemic is only part of the broader vista that you have of challenges in Jerusalem, some of which made the international news around Christmas, when both you and the Archbishop of Canterbury had pieces published in the major media outlets talking about the situation that Christians find themselves in Israel at the moment. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? Again, some people I think will know about this, others, this may be the first they've heard of it.
Yeah, you know, one of the challenges that the Christian community faces in Jerusalem is actually the rise of extremism and fanaticism within the area. And you know, for us, like, and the statement that me and the Archbishop of Canterbury have written in the Sunday Times was a follow-up on the statement that the heads of churches in Jerusalem have issued just before Christmas. And that was specific to Jerusalem. It had no political implications, although it could be like people could interpret that, but we were specific to address an issue of how some radical fringe Jewish groups within the Old City that are basically squeezing some of the Christian holy sites. So we have had an incident in Jaffa Gate, for example, with the Greek Orthodox Church, and only recently on Sunday, we had also the National Park wanting to expand the park on the Mount of Olives on the expense of the monasteries, both Catholic and Orthodox. And that created a bit of unrest. But again, it's important to note that within the state of Israel and Israel itself, the Christian community is thriving, in a sense, in terms of numbers. But we always say, like, you know, it's always not enough. Like, I know that, you know, within the Middle East, the Christians in Israel may be doing, like, really very well. But again, comparing it with other places around the world, you know, we could do better than that. So these are the kind of challenges that we face between the political situation in and around Jerusalem, whether we talk about checkpoints or the separation wall or things like that that's happening, the political conflict, that the church finds itself part and parcel of that. But I have to say that the Christian community continues to play a very important role of peace and reconciliation. And as Episcopalians and as Anglicans, we are really, the DNA of us is really being a via media, being in the middle way, in sense that bridging people together, bringing people together. There's a lot of endeavor about peace education in our schools, and bringing Jewish, Muslim, and Christian communities, because we are called as Christians to be absolutely people who promote. Our baptismal covenant is to preserve the dignity of every human person. And for us, Jews, Muslims, and Christians, you know, they are all the children of God, and it's important that we cater to everyone in that place we serve. So I know, like, you know, normally, like, the news hit like really kind of hot potatoes kind of thing, but there are lots of good news that happen within the Holy Land, really to celebrate the good relations among many multi-ethnic, multi-religious groups. But it's important also to note that we can always do better than we are doing right now.
And I guess a large element of the problems come in some ways, as we see in this country as well, and I see in my native Britain, from people at the extreme edges. How is Israeli and Palestinian society coping with the pull towards extremism generally, which certainly is visible in the politics of the United States?
Yeah, and I think it has become a common thing in the world today. Like I think our world becomes more and more polarized. The region in the Middle East, we have seen whether in my own diocese, if we can think about Syria, for example, or other places where there've been really a real threat of extremists who, like ISIS, for example, and the threat that happened in Syria and the civil war in Iraq and other places. We are trying to really promote that we as human beings, we need to kind of promote more acceptance, more embrace, rather than exclusion and segregation. And that voice of moderation is absolutely intrinsic and important, essential in our ministry, in a place where there is so much struggle for power and struggle for people who wanting kind of the community to look like one thing rather than more of a mosaic, more of a kind of that tapestry where there is so much diversity and there's place for everybody. And that's the thing that, people, especially people on the extreme side of things, they don't see the grace of that. And it's quite a shame because there's so much opportunity in place like Jerusalem, like, the city of peace. That's how we see it. And I think our mission as an Episcopal church is to preserve that character of Jerusalem, where everybody is welcome, where freedom of worship is preserved.
And I think we should ask you, given that your responsibilities extend well beyond Palestine and Israel, could you just briefly tell us about some of the challenges in the other countries for which you have responsibilities?
Yeah, so I think we're well acquainted with the situation in Syria, for example. When we talked about that, I hope that Syria is about to get out of the mess that happened. But at the moment, our eyes are really fixed on Lebanon. Lebanon also faces great difficulty, financially speaking, and as well as politically. And especially after the last Beirut blast that happened, a lot of our people became deprived, more poor, and the need for catering for those people become even more and more dire. I have to say, and I really kind of want to thank the American friends for standing next, and through the American friends to our Episcopal friends, sisters and brothers, who have been so generous to offer relief to our people in Beirut, particularly. And there are many also individuals who are really committed to bring about not only relief, but also sustenance and nourishment in times of great need. And these are the kinds of things that I had to deal with the first thing that I went into the office. And the same thing happened during the war on Gaza in May, when actually during my installation, rockets were flying over Jerusalem. But we tried to pretend that they are fireworks or something. But I have to say that during my installation, and some of you, and I really thank you, those who approached me and said, we've watched the installation online. During the installation, despite all what was happening around the cathedral, in that famous neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah, as you know, it's on the news, and in other cities in Israel, we had Muslims, Christians, and Jews in the cathedral celebrating the event. And I said in my sermon, if the church fails to be a beacon of hope in these kinds of times, and I think the church should revisit its theology and spirituality. And this has become like a beacon of hope for many people to see that we can live together, we can really celebrate God and God's presence in our midst. And this is exactly the gospel. That's the good news that we offer to people.
Amen. I mean, the question.
And it's because of you. I have to say it's really because of the prayers and the support that we get from friends like you that we keep going. It's really important. I want you to know that. It's not something that I say for the sake of compliment, but I really want you to know that you make a huge difference in our lives when you realize and we realize that we are partners and participants in God's mission in and for the world, and especially in Jerusalem.
I was privileged to be, as circumstances turned out, I was the one North American representative, yes, me with my accent, at the Archbishop's installation. And it was a very extraordinary time because, as the Archbishop said, rockets were flying overhead. As many of you know, St. George's Cathedral is in Sheikh Jarrah. There were riots going on around the contested evictions. It was near the end of Ramadan. The tension was palpable. And the Archbishop was installed on Ascension Day. And we sang great hymns of the triumph of Christ and the exaltation of Christ, as we do on Ascension Day. And I learnt something which I had known in my head ever since I'd been to seminary or many years previously, but I discovered rather more profoundly in my heart that when times are tough, we still have good news. And that's certainly something that I have learnt from the life of the churches in the Holy Land. So if I may, can I ask you to expand what you might suggest we can learn from the examples of our sister and brother Christians in your region and in your diocese?
I just want to share something before I really answer directly that question, is that one thing about the church in Jerusalem is that, yes, we have our diocese and we have our canons and we care for our people and all of that, which is of course understandable, like many of you who belong to your communities, and that's really all good and wonderful. But one thing about the ministry in Jerusalem that is slightly different from other places is that Jerusalem, of course, because of the geography of the place, and you mentioned in your introduction about the history of salvation is really important, but also the geography of salvation is as important. Jesus' incarnation, yes, happened at a specific time, but also happened at a specific place as well. So places like Bethlehem, Jerusalem, Nazareth, these places are not only places are mentioned in the Bible, but they are real places. They are places that you can visit, you can see, you can touch, you can smell. And what we do there in terms of ministry, whether we are Anglicans or Episcopalians or Catholics or Orthodox, or even Muslims or Jews, but for us, specifically Episcopalians, since we do the ministry there on behalf of the whole Anglican communion and on behalf of the whole Christian church, because of the place there that we are not only guardians and custodians of the holy sites and the places where things happen, but also that's important for you to realize that it's also your ministry in the States or in Australia or in London or in Africa, in any place. And we need to remember that also that the first Christian community sprang out in Jerusalem. We are all the descendants of the 3,000 converts that happened on the day of Pentecost. And that's exactly, I think, the root of our faith, comes to that place where there's so many meanings, there's so many layers to understand in that. So that's a very important point that I really want to make, that we pray for you regularly, whether through the Anglican cycle of prayer, whether through different activities that happen within the diocese, but at the same time, we are pretty sure that you also pray for us. You keep us in your prayers, and especially in those places where the fifth gospel is walked and is prayed and is complemented through contemplation, and reflection. So that's one important point I want to make. And I think, Christians in the Middle East in general are resilient people, like people who have seen quite a lot. They lived through difficult circumstances, quite often living in the eye of the storm, trying to kind of really discover and discern the presence of the holy and the divine in a very difficult situation among death and injury and many other stories that happen in people's lives. And I think, and I do believe that Christians around the world can really kind of learn from these experiences. And the only way to do that is really to come and see, to come and be among the people. And as I always say, like those who come to Jerusalem and be with us, they don't only enlarge our congregation, but they also bring about so much of their own spirituality and formation into our midst. And that's, so it's reciprocal. It's all about giving and receiving. And I believe that, there's so much that we can learn from each other. There's so much that we can support each other. And these things, they don't happen online. They don't happen virtually. Some do, yes, but I think for the most part, it's really important that for people really to come and see.
Thank you. Could I take you back to an earlier period of your ministry? You served for some years in Nablus.
That's correct.
Where the Christian percentage is minuscule, I think it's fair to say. Could you offer any reflection about how it was when you were, Nablus is 98, 99% Muslim, I think?
Even more, yeah.
It's, Christians are...
It's close to 100%.
Christians statistically could be the standard deviation that kind of doesn't actually exist, or whatever the mathematical phrase is. And there is a thriving parish to this day in Nablus. You spent some time there in an early part of your ministry. Is there anything from that time when you represented a really tiny minority that might be instructive for us? Similar again also to the role of the Christian community in Gaza, which again is statistically minute.
I did one holy mistake there. I know that there are 600 Christians in Nablus, among maybe something like 300,000. So it's a very small community. And the mistake that I did, that I actually took one of the 600 and claimed her to be my wife. So I had made them list. So I got married from a wonderful lady from Nablus, and so I think that was the highlight of my ministry. I know, but don't quote me on that, because according to the canons of the Episcopal Church, I shouldn't marry from my parish, which I did. We have very small pools, so anyway, excuses. But the ministry in Nablus was absolutely wonderful, because in a place where the Christians are very, very small in terms of numbers, actually there's almost one church for every Christian in Nablus. There are many, something like 15, 20 church buildings in that place, including a church which I supervised being built during my time there. So in 2004, we dedicated the Church of the Good Shepherd in Nablus, which was another church building. Really, it was really another joyous moment, especially after the Intifada. But the church ministry in Nablus was quite unique, because it's regarded as one of the toughest cities in terms of military activities. And I remember in 2002, and that's the year I got married, there was curfew almost the whole year. Like, I didn't leave Nablus itself for that whole year, only once, when I got married, and we had to go to Jordan to get married, because we couldn't get my family or Rafa's family into Jerusalem or my hometown in Galilee. But during these circumstances, I really discovered that it was like I don't want to equate it with Job's experience, but it was like a Job-like experience, that really kind of discovering God's presence in the whirlwind. For me, it was a transformational experience. a young priest. I began there at the age of 23 maybe. And then I grew up into a priest just to appreciate life in the midst of all the difficulties. But that was something that I could never have unless I lived that experience. And for me, I always so fond of those years where really my spiritual formation, coming straight fresh from South Africa with all the concepts of reconciliation and apartheid and all of these terms that people grapple with in South Africa and the Kairos and all these kind of movements there. For me, going back and seeing glimpses of South African experience in a way was a big challenge for me to believe more and more in reconciliation and more in bridge building. Despite everything that is happening, we ought to believe in peace and in coexistence and in conviviality. And may God really kind of embrace Archbishop Desmond Tutu, bless his soul. I knew him personally when I was in South Africa, and I learned a lot from his experience as an archbishop and as a leader. And today I look at myself really kind of to say, how can I, as a servant leader myself, be an agent of hope to my people? How can I do that? That's my mission as a pastor, as a chief pastor. Like, how can I really shepherd my people into these places where they can really experience God's presence in these difficult times? And that I wouldn't have done this, I wouldn't have understood this unless I really go back to those days in Nablus, where I remember that ministry kind of being on the front line, so to speak, of things.
That's very powerful, thank you. I remember trying to visit, we should say there is one of the two hospitals in the Diocese of Jerusalem is in Nablus and performs, they both perform heroic work in their context. I remember trying to visit Nablus at the end of 2003 and it was still ringed with soldiers, and they saw the bus coming and just waved us away as if we were out of our minds. Nobody seemed to go in or out. In the workshop that we were in just now, there was a lot of talk about individualization and the breaking down of community that I think in different ways we're all very conscious of in the West. And in the workshop, you spoke rather encouragingly about the fact that in your community, in your region, community is still very significant. Is there something that we might in the West learn or relearn about community life from the people of your region?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, maybe because of my being educated in the United States partially, and being also living in a place like Jerusalem and the Holy Land, I see a lot of resemblance. There's a lot of things that kind of really look alike, but at the same time, they are also things that are so different. One of the things that I really kind of watch, I referred in the previous session about life and in the East in general, like in the Middle East, the value of family is very important. And I think, like to understand many concepts, whether it's theological or it is spiritual or even social, it's important that, to think that of the Middle East as the nuclear family and the extended family is actually the base of the whole community. Because what happens is that like when we think in terms of family, and if we remember, if we go back to the early church, this is how churches were formed, like becoming like house churches. And house churches needed families to cater for. And out of that kind of experience grew up the whole concept of community, and that community is really the safe space in which the church and the community at large can practice its beliefs and also its traditioning, and how we really kind of hand over the faith to people that almost nothing happens outside the community. Now, concepts like, for example, the common good of the community, that is something that is really needs to be understood from that kind of structure that exists in places like Jerusalem and Nazareth and Nablus of our people, that is really based on the relationship within the one family. And that's why maybe people kind of really understand why we don't have homeless people in our communities. You know, because like no one becomes an outcast, because the family is always there to kind of embrace the community. It is a shame on the community to allow somebody to be outside that community. And you know, and to tell you the honest truth, like whenever I come to the United States or to places like Canada or even the UK, where I see like, you know, like food banks and shelters for homeless people, you know, like I really see God's grace at work in these places, because that's exactly how we do it as a family. We are the body of Christ. We are a family. That's how we define ourselves, a family of Christ. And nothing happens outside the family. Now, our understanding of nuclear family or extended family, or metaphorically speaking, a family, it is really important to understand that the psychology and the sociology of the structure in the Middle East does really evolve and revolve around that kind of concept of community. So that, and therefore, like from there, we can understand more and more about democracy, what democracy means, whether it is it really kind of the thing that about how to be an individual, to talk about individual right, or is it democracy means that we are really looking for the well-being of the community as a whole? If you know, and these are the kind of questions that people talk about when we are faced with kind of these terminologies that speak about kind of, and they're not necessarily Western terminology, because we know like the concept itself is Eastern, you know, coming from a Hellenistic or kind of a Greek origin. But these are the kind of conversations that we have as people, as Christians, as a church, is how can we build the church around those important concepts? Because, and just to end with that note, that is exactly what contextualization is all about.
Indeed, thank you. Could I possibly just ask a slightly churchy question as a follow-up to that?
What have we been saying all along? I'm just kidding.
I don't want to lower the tone of the conversation, but in the United States, in the Episcopal Church, we've been conscious that relationships in the wider Anglican Communion have got in recent decades and recent years rather strained, and the Episcopal Church hasn't always had, in recent years, that easier relationship with other parts of the Communion. You exist in a unique place. You are a graduate of Virginia, you're used to the United States. Some of your clergy, I know, have views that would echo more with the Global South churches. From where you sit in terms of the Anglican Communion, do you have any thoughts or advice to offer us in the Episcopal Church about how we hold on as a family? It's the Lambeth Conference later this year, as you will be probably painfully aware. What do we hope for as part of the Episcopal Anglican worldwide family?
And thank you, Dominic, for this question. And I personally, let me speak out of personal experience. You know, over the years, we have had two GAFCON conferences in Jerusalem. One was in 2008 and one was in 2018. As you all know, and the Diocese of Jerusalem itself is regarded by, in one way or the other, as theologically speaking, Global South. You know, our theology, in a sense, we still, and that's the conversation I had with my you know, colleagues and friends within GAFCON and Global South, that we are Orthodox as much as many within our Anglican Communion Orthodox, that in terms of faith. So, you know, like in terms of and then I want to be kind of here as well, quite like courteous about what I say, but I said it's really important to understand that our Anglican communion is diverse. And it's important that, even though that I regard myself as, as a diocese, I'm taking, we are conservative, but that doesn't mean that I demonize any other person. That's not part of my faith or my tradition or my conviction, is that we are all members of the same family. We are in one family, and that's the attitude. And always Jerusalem stood in a very unique place in order to kind of bridge the gap as much as possible between all the different views within the Anglican communion. And I know that Archbishop Justin has a very kind of difficult mission, I have to say, in order to bring everybody, because everyone will have a condition to put for their participation in the Lambeth Conference. But I think, my advice and what I do as somebody who is also, like I serve on different committees within the Anglican Communion, including the Standing Committee of the Anglican Consultative Council, myself. I see myself as a bridge builder. Like I really wish that we could all be together and put our issues on the table. Like, it's really important that we keep the conversation without kind of demonizing each other, without kind of telling each other how to believe and what not to believe. And that's the story. And we said that Jerusalem should always be a place that calls for unity and not division. That's the ethos of Jerusalem. That's the spirit of Jerusalem. I know it's kind of not an easy position to be in, and I really kind of say, again, we can say more things like when we are in more closer conversation and private, we can talk more about this, because it's a very difficult issue. Yeah, we all know that. But it's really, that's the line in which the Diocese of Jerusalem plays within the communion, in order to keep, because we have a gift. You see, the Anglican communion is a gift. And I just have been reading a lot about the instruments of communion and the whole Anglican ethos, the Episcopal ethos. How can we as Anglicans walk together despite our differences? And I know that, we are a gift. We are not like other churches that, kind of look the same, and, with all respect to everybody. But, the gift that we have as churches together, we have an opportunity rather than, I would say, a constraint. And I hope that everybody sees that. And that's what the message that Jerusalem delivers for the people, both locally and globally.
Thank you. You've given us a great deal to reflect on. Let me finish by asking you, in a sense, what we can give you. How can we support you in this unique and, I believe, vital ministry that sustains the Episcopal presence in Jerusalem and the region?
Now, first of all, I can do that quickly. How much time do we have?
You've got 5 minutes, I think.
Okay, now there are, I would say, the 4 Ps, I call them 4 Ps. It's easy, so that we can remember that easily. The first one is prayer. Now, please continue to pray for the Diocese of Jerusalem. And that is really important, because through prayer we are connected, we are related to each other. We are become more and more aware of our needs. It's important, we have a website, we have Facebook pages. Please continue to follow that and see things and faces that you can pray for. It's important. And if you need any help, the American friends are here to tell you more, and that's really important. So prayer is on the top list of what people can do for as much as we are praying for you as well. So it's kind of reciprocal as well. The second P is peace. We want you to pray for peace and advocate for peace within Jerusalem and the Middle East. As agents of peace, we are to be working towards equality, towards justice, towards all these values that really can ensure a just and lasting peace in the Holy Land and beyond. So that's the second P. The third P is pilgrimage. Come and see. Now, we want you to come and visit with us. We want you to come and see the lives of the people who are keeping the Christian tradition in the very place, birthplace, our spiritual capital, Jerusalem. Places like Bethlehem, places like Nazareth, these are places that want your presence so that really you can be blessed and offer a blessing to us. And the last one, it was added to my list, by the way. I didn't, it was, and somebody said, Father, like there's another P that I want you to add to the list. And he said, pennies. And here, if you have any question about pennies, in a sense, I want just to take you back quickly to Paul's experience and endeavor by making the collection to Jerusalem, to the church in Jerusalem, which we are all, of course, aware of. Jerusalem always been a place with many difficulties because it's being on the intersection of life, being the center of the world, being that place that everybody looks at. There's always struggle, there is always competition. And the Christian community quite often feels squeezed in all of that. And it's really important then to have that kind of support. And it's coming only from one thing that really I mentioned earlier, that the ministry that we are doing on behalf of the whole world. So it's your ministry. When you contribute or when you support a hospital or a clinic or a rehabilitation center or a deaf-blind child in Seoul, for example, you are adding to the ministry and mission that God entrusted to us and to you. And these are ways, and again, the American Friends of the Diocese of Jerusalem is absolutely the place where people can always connect, always talk about, find more about how they can do that. And also, you can get in touch with us, directly, but that's really an important way in which we can really bring all our thoughts, our prayers into tangible and expressive way in which we can really reflect God's love for the world, especially to those who are in need.
Archbishop, thank you. You have, I am confident, inspired and given a vision of hope and ministry and mission to all of us in the room. Thank you for your ministry and thank you for
Father.
being here.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.